welcome to Views from the Sideline, Episode 2. You're listening to the local voice on Orion Neighborhood Television, where our mission is to empower community members like you to create, communicate, and connect through television, radio, and video production. Now, let's get into it. It's Views from the Sideline, Episode 2. I'm here with my co-host, Joey Tysick. How you doing today, Joey?
I'm doing great, Chris.
All right, let's get into it. The rundown for the show today, we talk some MSU falling from the good graces of the AP poll, losing the number 1 spot, the Pistons limping through the weekend, talk some Michigan and Oakland losses this weekend, and some Piston trade rumors. We'll get into that. So let's get it going. Joey, MSU, your Spartans, big loss up in Ohio.
Yep. So last week I may have said that they were miles ahead of everybody in the Big Ten except for maybe Purdue, and I was proven very wrong. Ohio State looking like the real deal.
I mean, we talked about this last week too. We said when you have those rivalry games, you kind of have to throw away the record. Anything can happen.
Right.
So
Yeah.
going in, we kind of had a little bit of an idea that this could be a dangerous game for the Spartans.
Yeah, and Ohio State came out with all of the energy in the world, and Michigan State came out with nothing. And all season long, Michigan State has come back in a lot of second halves. They've started out slow, and then they'll just come out and change up their whole mindset, and they'll get their energy, and they'll go, and they'll run away with the game. That did not happen. Ohio State came right out of half, got a big dunk, and
It kind of was over from there. I mean,
yeah, immediately in the second half. And then Michigan State just got all out of sorts. They didn't know what to do, and they got pounced. And obviously, Ohio State's Keita Bates-Diop,
he had a
32 points.
He had a heck of a
He
game.
was unconscious, and he looked really good. And he could be the best player in the Big Ten right now. Obviously, Miles Bridges is there. Purdue has Haas. So there's a bunch of good players, but he right now, he has a mixture of everything. He has a great shot. He's a big, long guy, athletic. So he kind of messed up Nick Ward.
And I mean, here's another. Yeah, no, that was
Yeah.
a little rough. And then also another thing you got to think of too with Bates-Diop, he's really progressed as the season's gone. He was a little bit slower to start off the year, and that's why people weren't talking about him as much. It was more all Miles Bridges.
Right.
And now he's starting to get into his own, and now everybody sees what he's all about, and he's taking a toll on big name schools. I mean, you knock off MSU, ranked number 1 in the country, you're going to start to get some press now.
Right. Yeah, that's a big win. And the problem with Michigan State still is turnovers. They had 12, which isn't terrible, but compared to Ohio State's 6, Ohio State took care of the ball. And
6 is pretty impressive for any type of basketball game.
right. And in a game like that, when you're starting to get just beaten down, you need somebody to step up. And I think everybody expected that it was going to be Miles Bridges, and he just disappeared even further. He had no energy. He looked like all he was doing was settling for a shot, whereas he is an attacker first. And that was his big thing last year, is he would go to the basket, and that's where his turnovers caused problems. He would try to drive too hard, and he'd get a little bit loose with the ball. And now this year, it's like, yes, he's slowing down on the turnovers, way down from last year, but he doesn't have that attack mode. He's settling for shots. He was 7 of 19 from the field for this game. And granted, the Spartans shot 39% as a team, but you need a guy to penetrate the basket to be able to get open shots for your shooters.
Exactly. And when you have a guy like Miles Bridges who's going to attract so much attention from the defense, you really need him to just be in that attack mode and put so much pressure on the opposing defense to get your guys, like you're saying, your shooters open looks. If you don't have that, you're not going to have a good offense for that game. And that's really what happened with MSU. Bridges didn't bring his A game in a rivalry game, and MSU just never got into a groove, and they were down from the get-go. So what's something you think MSU's really got to bring next game? I think, honestly, it's just about right when the tip happens, you got to have energy.
Yeah, and I'm sure Tom Izzo will get the guys ready to go for the next game. That's why he's one of the best coaches in the country. He will try to inspire his team, and they'll learn from it. They obviously feel it. Um, as number one, the media pretty much bashed them for it for such a bad loss. At least they looked way out of sorts. So they'll definitely have some motivation, and I think they'll bounce back. They'll be fine. But this is a good wake up game for Michigan State. And the other thing too is that Ohio State really locked down on Nick Ward. They realized he was one that they had to stop. If they could stop him, it's going to create a lot of havoc because he's another guy that when he gets the ball in the post, the wing players come down and help, and it leaves the shooters open. They held him to 3 points, and he had 3 turnovers. He still got his rebounds, but Ohio State had big guys that could match up with him. They had Bates Diop with them for part of the game, and then they had their big guy Wesson, who he was really good. He had a really nice jump hook, and his body type is just like Nick Ward, and
Matched up really well.
yeah, and I think Nick kind of got a little bit tired or something, but that was definitely one of their focus points,
Yeah.
and it seemed to work.
And here's another thing, too. I mean, MSU loses to Ohio State, so the new poll comes out. They're ranked number 4 now in the nation, behind Villanova at 1, West Virginia at 2, and Virginia at 3. Coming up, we talked about how Izzo's going to have those guys prepared for the next game. I believe the next game is against Michigan. So I want to talk a little Michigan here, too.
That's another big game.
That was a huge game we watched last night. Purdue snapped Michigan's 7-game winning streak at Chrysler. What did you think of Purdue? We talked about it last week. Isaac Haas had a huge game for Purdue and really set the tone going into that matchup.
Yeah, they were pretty much exactly what you expect. When you have 2 7-footers on your team that you can just go interchanging, so when one gets tired, the other one comes in. That is hard for a defense, and I think Michigan played it great. Obviously, they came up short, but not without a lot of effort. And Purdue has scrappy players. Towards the end of the game there, they kept getting offensive rebounds that really hurt Michigan when they were trying to come back and get control of the lead. Michigan was right there, but it kept seeming like Purdue was making the bigger plays. And yeah, Isaac Haas is real deal. I think Mo Wagner did a great job on him. I think a couple of the calls were a little bit.
Yeah, we'll talk about that call in a little bit here. But
honestly, the last call, he did hold him on his waist. So that was on Wagner. He should have just, he was already past him. If he just moves his arm, he gets the steal, and you never know what happens from there. But this was a great showing for Michigan on big-time television. They got to play number 5 in the nation. We're right with them up until the end, and
it was a great test leading into MSU, too.
And
this weekend.
It's a tough couple back-to-back games, but Michigan looks like they are going to be up there in the Big Ten, and they could be in that top 4.
And could be a danger come tournament time, too. But here's another thing I want to talk about with that foul call on Wagner late that kind of decided the game. Isaac Haas hit a free throw late to seal the deal. But here's my view. The game was called real physical through the whole way until about the last 2 or 3 minutes. That's when the refs kind of took over the game. And to me, as a viewer, it really distorted how that game could have finished. It could have been an incredible finish if they kind of just let it play out.
Yeah.
And that was my thinking. That's why if I'm in that position, I maybe don't make that call just because of how physical you've allowed it to become to that point.
Right. It was kind of tough. The problem with that was that Wagner just before, a few minutes before the final foul, he did the same thing, and they called a foul on him that time too. So going into that, Wagner has to be cognizant that could happen again, and that he has to be a little bit careful. My biggest question too, with Haas missing the last free throw, why did Michigan not call their last timeout? And so I understand that a lot of the times on a missed free throw late in the game, you want the defense to be sporadic. So sometimes you can get out off a miss and just run up the floor, get a great shot, get a great look. But Michigan got to about half court, and there was still probably 2.5, 3 seconds, and they were at half court. Charles Matthews was cut off.
And he had to rush the shot.
I feel like Beeline right there. I know it's with only 2.5, 3 seconds left. I feel like he should have called a timeout, knowing that he wasn't going to maybe call it right away, right when they got the rebound. But if he would have called it when he saw that he was getting cut off, maybe you get set up and have a better look. Obviously, that's in hindsight, but I felt like if I was in that position, I would have called the timeout, try to get a set play, and maybe get a little bit better of a look.
Yeah, I mean, and I see from Beeline's point of view, you're trying to get the defense off guard, like you talked about,
Right.
and of course, hindsight's always 2020. So here we are discussing that. But you never know what could have happened if they called timeout. Another guy I want to talk about too that really needs to start to get into a groove. We touched again on this last week. Duncan Robinson.
Yeah.
He was struggling.
Yes.
He started the game off, but he didn't play starter minutes. He played only 14 minutes, and Isaiah Livers really took over, and he should probably be that starting forward for Michigan. I think it's no question now.
I actually disagree.
Ooh.
He is great. He's becoming one of my favorite players at the moment. But the thing about him is that I like his energy coming off the bench. The last 2 games for Michigan, he's come off and just lit it up. I think 2 games ago when they played Illinois, he hit 3 straight threes when he came in, and that was a big turning point. In this game, he started 4 for 4, and he's just an energy guy that I kind of like Michigan to have off the bench. I think their starting lineup is still solid. Yes, Duncan Robinson has struggled, but I think you give him the benefit of the doubt and keep Livers for that bench role as an energy guy to kind of come in and remotivate the team.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we'll see how it all plays out. Michigan still is playing terrific basketball late into the season, which I'm not sure many people thought would be the case. So it's good to see leading up to what's going to be a fantastic matchup this weekend against MSU, number 4 ranked Spartans. But let's get into another team here that had a really big weekend coming up and really kind of fell flat on their face. The Oakland Golden Grizzlies.
Yeah.
Couple big games against Northern Kentucky, and then followed that up with a game against the number 1 in the conference, Wright State. And they really blew 2 leads to both those teams, lose back-to-back games, and now 3 straight in conference play. What do you make of the Golden Grizzlies after what seemed to be maybe a season-deciding weekend?
Yeah, it was very rough losses. Obviously, Wright State and Northern Kentucky, 1 and 2 in the horizon. So, obviously, the competition was tough, but this is where you wanted Oakland to come out and prove themselves. And it kind of came down to what we kind of touched on last week, where Oakland has this big 3 going, led by Kendrick Nunn and Jalen Hayes. But beyond that, their depth is an issue.
It's such a lack of depth that you see.
They're so top-heavy that if you can lock those guys down, or if Nunn has a bad shooting night, it's going to cause trouble, and it's going to be hard for the team to score and keep up.
And I think we saw that against Wright State with Kendrick Nunn. He really struggled going into the second half against Wright State, and they were down 40-32 at home in a primetime game. He finally stepped up in the second half. That got the team going, and that's where you saw Oakland make that big push. They go up 71-68. Cole Gentry for Wright State hits a big 3 in a position maybe Greg Kampe looks back on, and maybe he should foul and send him to the line for 2 instead of the game gets sent to overtime. Wright State pulls it out. But you really, if you're Greg Kampe, you maybe try to get your role players involved more early on so you're not as dependent on them late in the game. All hindsight right now, but let's break down Oakland. They're sitting at 8th in the horizon as we speak. They're 1 and 3 in conference play, a 9 and 8 overall, not looking too good. And they really have a lot of ground to make up as we proceed here. And like you touched on, depth still an issue. We're gonna take a break here, and then we're gonna come back, talk some NBA hoops, some Pistons basketball here. Views from the sideline.
Please remember that CFL bulbs, those curly, energy-efficient light bulbs everybody is using to save electricity, shouldn't be thrown away in your trash. Neither should batteries or home medical sharps. You can check with your local community to see where they can be recycled. Some retailers will allow you to bring them in for recycling. You can also order simple kits online that allow you to collect your recyclables and simply mail them away to be properly recycled. This green tip was brought to you by your friends at Waste Management.
Welcome back into Views from the Sideline. We're talking some Pistons hoops now, where they really had a rough weekend.
Whew, that was
It wasn't the best of weekends for
spooky.
Pistons.
They made up for it, though, with one game.
1 out of 3. We'll touch on that too. But let's break down that first game, that Friday night big matchup. Andre Drummond coming off an injury against Miami. They're going into Philly. It's Embiid, Drummond, round 2. What'd you make of that?
Well, I don't think Drummond can talk at all, unfortunately. Pistons lost big, and it just didn't look good. It looked really bad, and especially coming into the new year again with the loss from Miami, going into the 76ers, you thought, okay, maybe we can turn it around. This is a big game, kind of a blooming rivalry to say. And
Is it a rivalry if you're down 3-0 in the series, though? I mean,
no, probably not, but still.
There's definitely, I mean, what was made up to be a little bit of fake bad blood, because we saw Embiid and Drummond kind of go and greet each other after last matchup, which was the big hyped matchup between the two big men. And I want to ask your opinion here. What did you make of the Andre Drummond free throw? He splits the pair, 1 out of 2, and then he goes ahead and shushes the crowd.
You stink!
You know, back in my playing days, it was always scoreboard. That was the ultimate winner.
That's all
no
you gotta
matter
say.
what you say, no matter what you do, if the other team is ahead and they say scoreboard,
It's done.
you're
You can't
you're
say
over.
anything.
You have no room to talk. And unfortunately, they were down by 30 at the time, which is possibly even worse. So I don't know what Drummond was thinking. I know it's kind of all fun and games at that point. When you're down that much, you're kind of all you can do is kind of laugh about it even. But they had no effort at all.
And here's my thing on this, to continue to touch on this Drummond subject here. He has done that before. It's not like that was his first time shushing the crowd. I'm not sure if it's somewhat of a routine for him a little bit. I mean, that's no excuse, because you should have your mind in the game. Okay, I'm down 30. I probably shouldn't shush the crowd.
Right.
That kind of makes you wonder where his head is at sometimes. And that's been an issue with him probably ever since the Pistons drafted him.
Yeah, he's kind of become like a playful guy, which is all right in certain aspects. It's very similar to a Dwight Howard kind of persona. But yeah, it causes problems where you think, well, Andre, you're down by 30. Can we maybe be a little more serious, or at
Maybe
least
focus on the defensive end instead of shushing the crowd.
kind of realize, hey, I think we're doing something wrong here. Maybe we should try a little harder or something.
Yeah. And I mean, there was nobody left unheard after that Stan Van Gundy press conference after the game. He let his team have it. That was a fun one to watch. If you haven't seen it, go take a look at it. And the team really bounced back, answered their coach's calls for more effort next time out. They were on a back-to-back. They would go back home to Little Caesars Arena and play the Houston Rockets, who were second in the Western Conference at the time. They were without James Harden, which was a big role in the fact the Pistons bounced back and got that win, but they did have Chris Paul. What'd you make of the effort the Pistons brought to the court on Saturday night?
I'd like to give a biggest shout out to Eric Moreland for his first start of the season. He looked pretty good. I thought that was a good matchup for the Pistons.
Yeah.
And the Pistons, I feel like, kind of escaped. Somehow, Chris Paul wasn't in attack mode. If you saw Chris Paul in the fourth quarter, he almost brought that game single-handedly. And I feel like if he would have tried to do that the whole game, Pistons might have been in trouble.
Here's one thing that I did see, that really maybe stopped Chris Paul from getting into such a flow early on, was when you start Eric Moreland, he was really high up on those pick and rolls with Paul and Capella, which really, made Paul more of a playmaker opposed to an attacker. When you're without James Harden, you probably need Paul to be more of an attacker. So I liked that aspect of Eric Moreland's defense. He brought everything that night.
Oh, yeah, he's high energy.
I think that definitely played a role into Paul getting aggressive late, not early on.
Right. Yeah, he had to settle in a little bit more.
Another guy I want to give a shout out to, too, is Dwight Bikes coming off the bench. I talked about it last week. I'm not sure if he could keep this effort up. He had a huge game against Houston. What did you think of Dwight Bikes? That guy was playing in Grand Rapids a few weeks ago, and he's coming here playing big-time minutes for the Pistons, getting big-time numbers against the Houston Rockets.
Yeah, I think that's the best benefit of these two-way contracts, is that players know that they are going to have a chance. And it's not just like these short little signings. The two-way contract, they can play on both teams, so they can kind of get their feet wet in the G League, and then They come up here, and if they give it the opportunity, they're going to attack, and they're going to show it their all and show what they can do. And Dwight Bikes has done that, and he's looked really good. I think him and Ish are kind of an attacking guard, which is nice to see. And they bring a little bit of that energy that I always talk about. But the best thing about this game was that you don't realize the Pistons have a good matchup against the Rockets. They're worse off against the Sixers and the Pelicans. Obviously, the Rockets don't have James Harden, so that's a big factor. But they still match up well. Capella doesn't stretch the floor for the Rockets. He's not a shooter. He's that athletic, running big man down the middle.
He's that rim runner.
Right. Ryan Anderson is a spot-up shooter, so we can easily lock him down with our lanky, athletic forwards that we have between Tobias and Tolliver, and even Eric Moreland could guard him if he wanted to. And then, like I said, Chris Paul wasn't assertive, and we stopped the big man that has just taken over Houston Nation, Gerald Green. Luckily, we locked him down because that man is a force, and
Oh my God.
I can't believe that the Rockets just were able to sign him and just.
And he got signed to an unguaranteed contract at the time, too. They guaranteed it now for the rest of the year, but he got signed with no guarantee that he was going to be on this team.
Exactly. But I don't know how he was out of the NBA, to be honest with you, because it seems like every team that he goes to, he has some sort of week or stretch where he just goes off. And he's a great shooter. I don't know how. And obviously, he jumps out of the gym. He's one of the most exciting players to watch. But, yeah, luckily this was a good matchup for the Pistons. And Tobias Harris played good. And it was just efficiency all around.
Yeah, it was an all-out team effort. Another thing I want to bring up, too, is actually today, Wednesday, we're recording the show for you guys, and Eric Moreland's contract gets guaranteed today. So he will be officially on the roster for the Pistons going forward. Today was the date that the Pistons could release him without having any repercussions on their cap. Looks like he's here to stay, which was really a pretty easy call.
I think it's deserving.
Very deserving. Now let's get to the third game, kind of rounding out the weekend here. Pistons kind of limp through that weekend. They play the Pelicans, like you said, is a tough matchup. AD, DeMarcus Cousins really kind of gave the Pistons all they got early on.
Yeah, it was another bad matchup. It's that typical stretch four, and the Pelicans happen to have two of them.
Yeah,
and
it doesn't help.
They're two of the best players, easily in the top 10 in the NBA, in my opinion.
Two top 10 scorers as well in the front court.
They're incredible, and they've worked out being on the same team even. And it doesn't help that Rondo just carved up the Pistons. And
I think Rondo was a really good fit for that team too, making sure Boogie gets his touches, AD gets his touches,
right.
And then you fill out that roster. My only question is, how does Drew Holiday feel about being that third fiddle?
Right.
It seems like he's fine.
I think he's scored pretty well this year, and there's been a lot of games where they will switch their guard play up a lot, and it won't always be Rondo. It'll be Etuan Moore and Drew Holiday, and they kind of switch it up, so it kind of helps Drew Holiday, I think, feel more involved, and he's had some really good games.
Definitely. I mean, Solomon Hill, their starting small forward for the season, he's been injured, so they've started Etuan Moore at the 3, Drew Holiday at the 2, really a small backcourt and small forward spot. But when you have DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis behind you, that's really not too much of an issue.
You don't need any other rebounding help.
Etuan Moore really gave Tobias Harris all he could handle defensively because that guy was carving him up. He was 11 from 14 from the floor, 23 points. That guy had a heck of a game and really gave the Pistons havoc down the stretch. And what turned out to be a Pelicans win late. Some really bad execution by the Pistons late on. One thing that I wanted to bring up on the show today is, what's your opinion on the Stan Van Gundy out of timeout plays? I feel like they never can get any good looks. I mean, if you think about it, you got the Avery Bradley contested in the corner. Stan said later on that wasn't the play they were looking for, but I feel like he said that a lot lately.
Yeah, it's almost like an excuse, like, oh yeah, that wasn't what we were looking for.
Yeah.
But I don't know, they got to get some more movement on those out-of-bounds plays and timeout plays.
And you'd think with such a motion offense that would be easier this year opposed to some before. And
right, they already set so many off-ball screens. That's usually what you do. And for some reason, I don't know if it's the execution or if it's what Stan is drawing up. That's the issue. We don't necessarily know for sure.
Of course, yeah.
But, yeah, that definitely seems like that's a problem.
And they were sloppy from the start, too. If you watch this game from the first quarter through the fourth, Pistons came out sloppy. They had a lot of turnovers early on. Ish was kind of slow to get going. Avery Bradley was really slow to get going. That guy had just an abysmal first half.
Yeah,
It was
that's
really,
a couple games now.
and I mean, it was shocking to see him actually be productive in the second half with how bad he was playing in the first half. Good to see that. Another thing I want to touch on here, Stanley Johnson was a healthy scratch. And as we lead into trade season here, that's something you might want to keep an eye on. I mean, Stanley Johnson, he was coming off a hip pointer. Stan Van Gundy said later on post-game that he maybe should have had him out there. But for a guy that's really, he was the eighth pick overall in 2015, you're not getting any playing time for him. That says a lot about what the team's opinion of him is moving forward.
Right.
And then another thing, Pistons are now 7-12 since their 14-6 start. Really just limping through the schedule right now with all these injuries. What do you think about them right now? 7-12. That's kind of a scary record for you.
Yeah, they're gonna be in a little bit of trouble. I wish they would have stolen this Pelicans game. They had a chance.
They did have a chance. That would have been a big win.
When you see Anthony Davis leave the floor in the third quarter, that's when you got to strike. And they kind of did. They capitalized on Pelicans had 17 turnovers, which is a lot. So that helped them a lot. The Pelicans got a little bit sloppy. But then late in the game, kind of like you said, Etuan Moore and Rondo kind of carved them up and got some easy baskets to seal the deal. But the Pistons looking forward, it's going to be rough, and these injuries are going to be concerning. And like you said, we don't know what's going to happen with Stanley Johnson. There's a lot of other talk about some other players, and we'll talk about that later. So it's really concerning to see where the Pistons are at right now. I think they'll still be fine in the grand scheme of things, but it's a little bit spooky right now.
It's spooky. It's dicey. We'll get into that some more. We're going to head to break here on Views from the Sideline. You're listening to The Local Voice on Orion Neighborhood Television.
This is Lake Orion's own The Local Voice. Call ONTV and get on air 248-393-1060. Let your voice be heard. Internet radio for all. Call ONTV and get on air.
Welcome back to Views from the Sideline. I'm your host, Chris, and my co-host, Joey Tysick. Now, we talked about this leading into the break here. Trade season's upon us. It's really that early trade season. We're just under a month from the February 8th NBA trade deadline. And there's some big names out there. DeAndre Jordan of the Clippers is a name that's been thrown around, and some other big teams going after big-time players. And we're going to get into this here. Joey, who's a guy that you think could be on the move coming in this trade season?
I think the biggest name is, you just said it, DeAndre Jordan. The Clippers are in a rebuilding state. Most people think, especially with Blake Griffin going down again, it looks like they're going to be looking to change things up after Lob City has probably finally come to its final
I think it was
conclusion.
over when Chris Paul kind of left, but
Yeah,
I mean, you still
you have the remaining DeAndre Jordan and Blake Griffin, but right now DeAndre Jordan rumored most likely for the Cavs or the Bucks seem to be the most interested, and that's concerning, especially for the Pistons again, because that's the Eastern Conference. So if DeAndre Jordan comes to the East, what do you think that does to the Eastern Conference? Does that shake things up? Who do you think is a better fit for him, maybe?
Well, I definitely think the better fit would be Cleveland. It's just a matter of, does Cleveland throw in that Brooklyn pick? I think that's what's going to all come down to if DeAndre goes to Cleveland or not. And all reports suggest that that's not going to be the case. So that's my only concern with if DeAndre Jordan is going to go to Cleveland. But if he goes to a team like Milwaukee, that separates that teams from the Pistons even more, because then you have a DeAndre Jordan joining a core of Eric Bledsoe, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Jabari Parker, and I can go on. And that's a team that's sitting 6th seed right now in the Eastern Conference. Not to mention the Miami Heat are sitting at 4 right now. They've rattled off 5 straight wins. They're at 23-17. Wizards, they're at 23-17. I mean, if DeAndre comes to the East and it comes to a team that's fighting for a playoff spot, that really hurts the Pistons coming down the stretch here. If you're Detroit, I mean, you might even hope he goes to Cleveland if he goes to anywhere in the East, because you know Cleveland's going to be in the playoffs regardless. But another team I want to look out for in the DeAndre Jordan sweepstakes, the Miami Heat. If you have watched any Miami basketball recently, they've really gone away from Hassan Whiteside late in games. It's been mostly Kelly Olynyk playing the 5, James Johnson playing the 4, And to me, it looks like more so a Whiteside effort issue. He's not going contesting shots like he used to. He's not being aggressive in the paint. And if you add a DeAndre Jordan to a team like that, and that's also a team, Pat Riley shows that he takes chances on big-time players.
Right.
And to swing a deal, maybe you throw Hassan Whiteside, a Justice Winslow who's not getting any playing time in Miami. That could entice the Clippers. And Miami gets a star player to go along with Goran Dragic, which could be a killer pick and roll, maybe Lob City 2.0. What do you think about Jordan if he ended up in Miami?
Yeah, that's probably a good fit now that you mentioned that. And it would be kind of what the Clippers would be looking for, some young talent that's still there. They're definitely down, but Justice Winslow just doesn't get the time. He played a bit in his rookie year, and he looked okay at times. So he's probably still got some potential there. And Hassan Whiteside is just having a really weird season. He's looked a little bit better lately, but I think they're more willing to get rid of him with the coming out party of Adebayo.
Bam Adebayo, he's looking fantastic.
He had a big double-double last night. And so they're probably a little bit more willing to shop Hassan Whiteside at this point. And DeAndre Jordan would give them
a better identity defensively, in my opinion.
Right, yeah. He's more of that. He can move. I feel like he moves a little bit better. And
you're going to get effort out of him, too. And that's really the question with Hassan right now, I feel like. And talk about more about Hassan Whiteside here. He's coming back from a bone bruise, and he just hasn't looked the same coming back. And that could be an issue. Maybe he's still hampered by the injury. But if you're Miami, you want to capitalize on this 23-17 start. You missed the playoffs last year due to a tiebreaker after going 30-11 to close out the 2017 season. So Riley might be looking to make a big move here, make a big splash, and I think they're primed to be one of those teams as a dark horse to a superstar player on the move.
Yeah, and like you said, Goran Dragic and DeAndre Jordan are both very familiar with pick and roll offenses, and I feel like they would work really well together. And another spooky thing for the East is that they have shooters all surrounded by those guys.
Such a good shooting team.
So they have Wayne Ellington that is just chucking up shots at an incredible rate, and he's been pretty efficient for the most part.
Yes,
but just anybody that is willing to shoot that many times is going to have one of those nights, and that's always a scare for a team to play against. And Goran Dragic has played really well down the stretch lately, and they're kind of on one of those runs again where they're looking for the playoffs.
And I mean, Josh Richardson too, he's really kind of supplanted himself as a starting small forward on this team, taking the minutes away from Justice Winslow. And you're talking about this team making a big run. They just went into Toronto, beat the Raptors. There were some fireworks in that game. That would be a really fun playoff series if it came down to it. But this is a team you got to look for as we get later into the season. Now, I want to talk about the Pistons here. This has got to be a big deadline for them as well, I would feel like, because
they should definitely be concerned, that's for sure.
Concerned. You're 4 years in on the Stan Van Gundy era. You're still 21-18. I thought this is supposed to be a turnaround now.
Yeah.
But what's your take here? What do you think the Pistons have to do as a deadline approaches here?
They have to get more shooters. They have to get somebody that can just stretch the floor and knock down shots. I know that's what Stan Van Gundy usually runs his offense around, but it seems like in this era of the Pistons, he said that he was going to do that, and he didn't really get straight-up shooters. He got some good players, no doubt.
He did get a good shooter that's just hanging out on the bench right now.
Right, and that's one of the issues, is that it seems like he didn't completely stick to the plan, so I think they need to bolster their guard play, and I would really like to see them get a stretch four. Anthony Tolliver is more of a bench player, and I really wish that we could play Tobias at the 3 and not have to play him at the 4. I feel like it would be a more comfortable fit. So if we have that stretch 4 that every other team in the NBA has, basically, that would give us a more dynamic offense where Andre Drummond could just take over the paint, and there could be 4 guys around him either attacking or shooting the ball.
Definitely. And you really touched on it here. Tobias kind of is a defensive liability at that power forward spot. We really saw it against DeMarcus Cousins against the Pelicans. I mean, that's one situation you're going against an all-NBA type player, but Tobias generally is not the best defensive player. Put him in a small forward spot, you'll get better defensive focus out of him. And I want to talk about a piece that came out on ESPN earlier this week by their Adrian Wojnarowski. He said Detroit's been the most aggressive team early on in the trade market, and I think that's a really telling sign of what Stan thinks of the team moving forward here. And Stan even said it for shoot around following that piece coming out that they're looking to see if anything works for them. They like their guys. Of course, he's going to say that to just
Right.
cover
You want
himself.
to try to please as many people as you can.
Exactly. But I thought that was really telling because Stan's usually a guy that will say, don't listen to the media. And that really kind of shed some light to me of the thinking that Stan realizes he's kind of on the hot seat a little bit. Yep. So we'll see going on here. In the same piece, Woj talked about wings that are on the market. Brooklyn's Damari Carroll, Utah's Alec Burks, Atlanta's Kent Bazemore, who I would think would be a fantastic fit in Detroit. Athletic, can shoot from the perimeter, and we'd still have to be stuck with Tobias at the 4, but it just leaves you some more versatility switching on the perimeter. And then another guy that I kind of want to talk about here, Orlando's Evan Fournier, an interesting name on the trade market. Of course, it's another Orlando wing. Pistons are quite familiar with Orlando during trade season. Stole Tobias from them in the 2016 deadline, shipped out Brandon Jennings in the contract of Ersan Ilyasova. No picks to get a star like Tobias Harris. So we'll see. What's your thinking of Evan Fournier here? What do you feel he could bring to this team if he was a guy the Pistons decided to target?
Obviously, he's the shooter that you want. The only issue that I have with Fournier is not actually with Fournier. It's with the deal that would be behind it. And there's been past discussions about shopping for Fournier with the Pistons, and they've typically had to involve Reggie Jackson's contract, which is a big deal. And the other issue would be it would maybe be a trade that we would have to send Avery Bradley, potentially.
Honestly, right now, I'm not even too opposed to that. Avery Bradley, yes, he's come back from an injury, but he hasn't looked the same. His defense is solid. His ball handling has been abysmal this year. He's gotten plenty of turnovers, and his shooting's just not there. It says his percentage is just under 40% from deep, but he's thrown some clankers up there recently, and it just makes you question, is he the guy you really want to invest over $100 million into this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, the money is definitely an issue, but I would almost rather see maybe him walk, which is weird to say, because
and get nothing for him after you traded a Marcus Morris
because
and a second round pick.
The problem that if we're trying to make trades to push for the playoffs, and Fournier doesn't have that defense that Avery Bradley does, and I know that Avery Bradley has struggled from the offensive side, but in the East, there are so many top-level guards that if we have Fournier, I feel like we might struggle defending those guards. You think of Washington as John Wall, there's Kyrie Irving, Isaiah Thomas. It's a very guard-heavy Eastern Conference, and that's a little bit concerning, is why maybe Fournier might not be the best option, I guess.
I can definitely see that. I mean, if, let's say, let's say the Pistons acquire Fournier, Reggie's still on the team, you got to put Reggie Jackson against a John Wall. You don't want to do that.
Yeah, that's not.
Ish Smith against a John Wall. You don't want to do that. You bring up some very valid points there. My thing is, your defense hasn't been there for most of the season anyways. Might as well double down on offense.
Okay, that's a little bit true.
I know they talked about how we're going to be a defensive team this year. This is going to be our calling card. That's not the case. It maybe was for a week to start the season. This team just isn't buying into that. Might as well double down on what everybody loves, offense. Get some fans in the seats. That's really been an issue for the Pistons this year, too. If you start to play a more exciting brand of basketball, create more of a buzz downtown, get more fans, that could help the team overall. That's my thinking. I would try to get everything in your power to get Evan Fournier.
But does Evan Fournier bring that excitement to the team?
It's just,
like when you announce, hey, we're getting Evan Fournier from the Orlando Magic.
No, I definitely.
What does that?
I know. I'm more talking about the aspect of the style of play will bring more fans down.
Right.
And that trade could be the start or the signaling of this fast-paced style of play.
Right.
And that's my thing in there. But here's one thing that I would go after Fournier with all you got, except do not attach a pick. I am all opposed to attaching picks for players right now. With this team, with this lack of depth and talent for this team,
yeah,
I understand Stan Van Gundy has struck out on drafts coming up, but Stan Van Gundy's not going to be here for all time.
Right.
So we need to make sure we have plenty of first-round picks to acquire young talent, cheap talent, And you could have guys that are like Devin Booker come to your team at a cheap talent. Guys like Donovan Mitchell, cheap talent, and kind of play that role. It'd be nice to have a player like that on this team.
Yeah.
But here's another thing. Pistons are in huge need for wing players. That's another thing Woj talked about too in the piece. They are the most aggressive along with New Orleans, New York, and Portland looking at wing depth. So you have some competition there. And we talked about the names going forward. Evan Fournier is going to as a potential player to be moved. Another name we need to watch for the Pistons as we inch closer to the deadline, the Bulls' Nikola Mirotic. I mean, he's not a prototypical small forward. He plays more power forward, more small ball. He could be a really good fit for this team. What's your take on Mirotic?
Yeah, I actually think that he would be a better fit than an Evan Fournier. He kind of does exactly what I was talking about earlier, where it would move Tobias to the 3 and it would allow Mirotic to be the 4. We would still have a bit of a defensive issue, but like we said, we already have some defensive issues. So being able to at least stretch the floor, that causes problems for the opposing defense. So we would be able to run, again, that more high-tempo offense, and we could get back to more shooting. And it's funny because Mirotic reminds me so much of Stan in Orlando with Hito Turkoglu.
Hito, yes.
I mean, they're pretty similar players.
Hito's more of a playmaking forward, but I definitely see that comparison when it comes to stretching
they still
the
have
floor.
that spot-up shot.
Definitely. And another thing, I want to set the table for the people here. Mirotic is a stretch big. He's averaging about 17 points per game, 7 rebounds per game, and he's shattering a career high of 45% from deep. Yes, it's only a small sample size. He's played about 12 games coming back from injury. I mean, he kind of had a puncher's shot to start the season early on, but here another team involved in the Mirotic sweepstakes you got to keep an eye on is Utah. They've been engaged with talks with him. The date you got to keep an eye on for Mirotic, January 15th. That's the date that he is eligible to be traded, and that's when these deals can start to consummate if there's going to be anything. My issue with Mirotic, again, like my issue with Fournier, is the price tag.
Right,
The
that's
Bulls-
always the issue.
And the Bulls say that they are not selling for anything less than a first-round pick.
Right.
In your opinion, Joe, is Mirotic worth a first-round pick?
I would say if we're going for the playoffs, yes. If the Pistons start to get a little bit scared that maybe they'll get booted from the playoffs, which I don't think will happen, but if they get a little nervous about it, then don't give up your picks, obviously. And maybe the one issue that we'd have with Mirotic is that if the Bulls pick up his team option, he loses his veto
His no trade clause.
for his no trade clause. And
But that also makes him not as appealing to opposing teams. So
Right.
that's an issue there as
because then the Pistons would have to pay $12.5 million to
Exactly.
him the next season. So obviously that'll be a telling sign too. But I think Mirotic, I would rather give up a pick for Mirotic than Fournier, at least, in my opinion.
Really? That's actually
Again, it depends on who the other player would be, like a player that we would go alongside with. But I would almost rather give up a pick for Mirotic, only because I think he's a more
a better fit
pressing fit. Yes,
and a more pressing need.
because yes, Fournier is very good, but like we said, to get rid of Avery Bradley could be rough. And I feel like our guard bench play is good enough where that's not as concerning as I think the stretch 4 position would be for the Pistons.
See, I think everything is concerning with how depleted this Pistons team is due to injury. You're playing a dude that's coming off who's on a 2-way contract as your backup point guard. Your wing depth is not there at all. Your backup small forward, Reggie Bullock, is now starting. So definitely, I think there's needs all across the board. It's going to be interesting to see which way Stan Van Gundy and the front office decide to go. I'm against. I have the opposing view. I can't see giving a first-round pick for a stretch big for a playoff run that's probably going to end in the first round if you make the playoffs.
But then again, too, if you go for Mirotic, that allows Tobias to move back to his natural 3, and that would move Reggie Bullock back to the bench of the 3, so that he would be more comfortable because he's gotten some starts now, and I think he would be a better bench player in that aspect. Whereas if you do Fournier, and it kind of messes up our guard play a little bit, and you're still playing Tobias at the 4 and Reggie having to start at the 3, I think it just it allows the team to play more natural positions. So that's the only reason that I give up a first round pick. But that, again, that's if the asking price is right. It still depends on who the other player is, because you don't want to give up too much for Mirotic. He's not that level of a player, but I think he would fit better where he would be worth a first round pick.
And I want to let the people know here, we're not just taking Mirotic out of thin air here. He's been rumored. He has asked for a trade from Chicago after the whole incident early in the year. Mark Stein of the New York Times, former of ESPN, reported the Pistons' interest in Mirotic yesterday, along with Utah, who's engaged in serious talks with them off and on. Throw Portland in there, has been interested. So this is definitely, these are players that are on the radar for the Pistons. We're not just pulling these guys out of thin air saying this could be a good fit. These are guys the Pistons have expressed interest in.
And the hardest part, too, is I feel like the Jazz are more willing to just throw players away now that they've kind of fallen out of the playoffs, whereas the Pistons are more in a kind of that gray area. They don't know. They're going to be at the edge of the playoffs.
And Stan just wants to win. He doesn't care. He's not going to throw it in.
And the Jazz are more starting to look like they're going to have to rebuild, and they might be willing to give up more. So it might be a tough race for the Pistons to win. And they might ask too high of the Pistons, so I don't want the Pistons to stretch.
You don't
get me wrong
overbid
on
for
that. Yeah.
I mean, and the reports say that the Jazz have been Derek Favors has been a guy that's been rumored that may be involved in the talks, who is playing backup center minutes now with Rudy Gobert back. So we'll keep tabs on this. We'll definitely keep talking about all these trade rumors coming up for the Pistons moving on to the following weeks. Now, I want to talk about the Pistons and what they have of value right now. Who are your untouchables? Who are your players that you're willing to sell off if you're GM of the Pistons? Who are guys that you're ready to say, all right, time to send you away?
Everybody, pretty much.
Everybody.
Except for Tobias Harris and Andre Drummond. He's become back to the player that I hoped he would be, so I don't think you want to move him right now.
So
he's developing well. Where his head's at is a little bit still concerning. So again, if we had the perfect trade and it involved Drummond, but it was for some great player, I might be okay with that. And again, Avery Bradley, I don't know about moving him. I don't think he's untouchable, obviously, but he is.
I mean, if you move Avery Bradley, I mean, it's all for loss. You're not getting him back in the summer, so that you're mailing it in on him. My untouchables, read as follows.
And Luke Kennard.
Luke Kennard's your untouchable. Okay.
Which SVG said he's not going to trade. So
my untouchables go like this. There's nobody that's untouchable. I will trade everybody for the right trade, except for first round picks. I'm not trading first round picks. You need to have that stash for what will probably be a failed attempt at being successful in Detroit, Stan Van Gundy. But Stanley Johnson's a player that's definitely going to have some value. The Spurs were interested in him in the summer. We'll see if that maybe can fetch anything of value. I wouldn't be opposed to bringing in some shooting to this team, like you talk about. Maybe a Wayne Ellington and Wesley Matthews. Wayne Ellington's very appealing because he is an unrestricted free agent in July, so you can maybe get him in here, get him into the system. And that's a guy that Miami's not going to be able to pay this summer. So you really got to be thinking of that. A couple of players on the block, too, in L.A., the Lakers have been said to go Julius Randle, Larry Nance Jr., and Jordan Clarkson are on the block. And Jordan Clarkson's a really interesting name to me. And I think he could really fill a void for the Pistons on this team. He could play combo guard minutes for you. You could play some shooting guard, play some point guard, and can fill the role for you until Reggie comes back. I would really like to see Jordan Clarkson on this team.
Yeah, he'd be a great fit. And the Lakers have so much young talent that the Pistons might be able to sneak out with a sneaky deal that would be heavily in our favor.
Especially because LA really wants to shed this salary going into the offseason.
When he starts and when he plays, he's very efficient, and he can fill up the stat sheet, which is great, and he's kind of the aggressor that the Pistons would need. And yeah, I'd be definitely okay with that trade.
Yeah, I mean, it always comes down to who you're willing to give up. And I want to throw someone at you here. This is a big name that people aren't talking about very much that could be on the trade market, but could be, as we inch closer, could be a guy that comes out of nowhere. the 15-23 Charlotte Hornets, their star point guard Kemba Walker. Do you think the Pistons have any chance, have any assets to acquire a guy of that caliber?
Probably not.
Probably not.
He would be a dream to get, honestly. He's one of my favorite players to watch. He's just exciting.
That UConn connection, him and Andre?
Right, yeah, maybe that's a connection. But yeah, he's an exciting guy to watch. He would definitely, I think he would bring people to the stadium.
Oh, definitely.
And I think he'd be a great fit because he's an attacking point guard. He can shoot it, but he's really developed at a very incredible rate, and he would be good. I don't know how he would do it, but he would be a player. You'd give up a first round pick for Kemba Walker, right?
I would give up the whole farm for Kemba Walker right now.
Okay,
especially because he's still locked in for next season as well. So that's a big thing in my thinking of, do I attach a pick for a player like that? If it's only a 1 year, half a year rental, I'm not doing it.
Right.
But if he's going to be here for next season and you can start to change their opinion of the franchise and get them to buy in a little bit, then it becomes not as hard of a hit to take to throw in a couple picks. Kemba, I would throw picks in for that. My only question is, do you have enough talent? That would probably be a trade that you'd have to have a couple teams in there to make sure Charlotte gets what they want. Because if they're selling off Kemba Walker, they're mailing it in for a couple seasons.
Right, and I don't want to give up like a Tobias Harris in that deal.
You might have to, though. You might.
Well, that's the problem. I don't know if I would want to go.
I would do it. I mean,
I don't know if I'd want to shake up that much, even though he's definitely like on the same level as a Tobias Harris as a player.
I think Kemba's above Tobias Harris as a player.
And it just
here's
like
my
our like we said, our wing play is already in the dumps.
Yeah.
So like if you have to give up Tobias Harris in that deal, it makes it kind of tough.
And you might be mailing it in for this season for success in future seasons.
Right.
But in the NBA, it's a point guard driven league. That's why I'm more okay with shipping a Tobias Harris, who's huge in this offense for the Pistons, to get a Kemba Walker, because today's NBA, it's all about, do you have a starting caliber or a star guard caliber point guard to drive the team to the playoffs? That's where we see teams that have good point guard play keep moving on. You see it with, Golden State. You can't really bring up Golden State. They have good everything.
Right.
But Boston last year, Isaiah Thomas, almost MVP level.
Yep.
That's why they went far.
I mean, you saw like last year, Kemba carried his team in a lot of games, and he's done so. This year, he hasn't had to as much, or maybe not gotten the opportunity because they're pretty healthy. They just haven't played well. But he would definitely be a guy that you can build around, especially if you keep him and Drummond together. Is a good to have a guard and a big man down low is really nice. Before we start to wrap up, though, I would like to talk about one more player that's on the opposite spectrum, as he would be a rental for the year.
Okay.
So if you decide to push for the playoffs,
this is a guy you could be looking at,
and he's available, is Tyreke Evans.
Oh my! Can we not talk about Tyreke Evans? I understand he's having a heck of a season. Where has he been the past 7 years, Joe?
It doesn't matter. That's what I'm saying. If we're talking about a playoff push, he's right now. The only problem, again, he's a rental.
And I've heard that Memphis, it seems like they're probably setting a first round pick. Would you give up a first rounder for Tyreke? I feel like there's
for a
more
rental, that would be tough.
There's more of a chance I give up first rounder for Mirotić opposed to Tyreke Evans.
But if we could do, I don't know. The only thing that I even came up with was like Stanley Johnson in a first round. I feel like that would be okay. I'm all up with getting rid of Stanley. As much as I like the guy, like
he just has no offense to him. There's no offense.
he just seems like he's not working out, and he's a good guy when he gets going, and his defense is outstanding.
Might as well get value for him now while he has some of it before it's completely gone.
And
I see it.
Maybe there's a chance Tyreke would want to stay, but that would be hard with the Pistons contracts. But that's just a guy that I thought of that seemed like he would be a really good fit. He's kind of a combo guard. He's played a lot of point guard this year, so he's learned to facilitate the basketball, but he can score at will when he wants to.
Oh, definitely. He's shown that this year. One last thing before we wrap up here. Here on Views from the Sideline, we're bringing another segment into play here, the Burning Take. Joe, now the Burning Take is going to tell the people your big prediction for the upcoming week until we hit the airwaves again next week. So what is your big prediction at basketball in the state of Michigan? Hit it.
I hate to say it, but I feel like the Pistons are going to fall out of all of these trade talks. and that
you think they're going to stay pat?
that's concerning. Yeah, and it might be my burning take up until
The deadline.
But I feel like the Pistons are aggressors every year, and they tend to not make deals lately. Like Stan is always shopping, but he never seems to really make that big blockbuster type deal.
I feel like he makes the trades when no one expects it.
Right, and that's concerning because I think there's a lot of talent that is on the market right now that we should try to jump on while we can. And he says that he's going to, and I believe him to an extent, but I just feel like, again, our assets are in a weird place, our draft picks are in a weird place, and the teams that are also involved are either maybe higher caliber teams that have more assets or a team that's just looking to dump players. And that puts the Pistons in that weird middle ground that they are in the league, and now you see it in their trades, and it just kind of causes a lot of problems.
All right, my burning take, I got the Pistons plummeting down the standings this week. I have them going 1-4 in the next 5 games. They go to Brooklyn tonight, at Chicago on Saturday, Zach LaVine's debut, versus Charlotte on Martin Luther King Day, at Toronto after that, and then versus the Wizards next Friday. I have them going 1-4. I think they'll be on the outside looking into the playoff picture by next Friday. And then that's really when you're going to start to see, are the Pistons serious about these trade talks?
Who do you think they beat? The Nets.
I got them
tonight?
beating Brooklyn tonight.
Okay.
And
yeah,
then
because the Bulls are playing pretty good, actually.
Bulls are playing good. And then Charlotte, I feel like Monday at 12:30, Pistons might still be sleeping.
Oh,
so
and Kemba and Dwight are always a factor. So
all right, well, that's our show for the day. Next week, we'll have some more college basketball talk. We'll have some more Pistons wrap up. We might have some potential guests joining the show next week, so stay in tune for that. You're listening to The Local Voice on Orion Neighborhood Television. We'll see you next week. Same time, same place. See ya.
bye.